From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and people like you who are making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Malathopoulos, Associate Professor of Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. This is the last episode in our September series on bee-friendly gardening, and I'm so excited to be introducing to you one of our listeners, Elliott Gordon's from Albuquerque, New Mexico. He emailed me recently with some suggestions for people who should be on the show, but his email was so interesting that I thought he should be on the show. Elliott is a native plant gardener. He's an amateur naturalist, but I gotta say, his amateur is a pretty high standard, as you can hear in this episode. He started in Albuquerque with this front yard that was just basically gravel, and then he transformed it into a pollinator habitat, a really diverse habitat for all sorts of creatures. In this episode, you're going to hear how he made that transition, but also how he married his interest in natural history with garden design and the tools he's using to document biodiversity on his property, which I think is a great next step for those of you who've taken a plunge into native plant gardening or gardening for pollinators to actually start to look at what you have. It's such a great activity, and you're going to hear all about it this week on Pollination. Hey, Elliott, welcome to Pollination.
Thank you, Andoni. Happy to be here.
You showed me a picture of your property when you first bought it. Can you describe it? Like, what did it look like to our listeners? What did you witness when you bought the place?
Yeah, I live in a fairly typical suburban lot and neighborhood. My property is a little under a quarter of an acre, rectangular, neighbors on all sides. And my front yard faces west. And before I'd moved in, back to when the house was originally built, there were a couple of cottonwood trees and a lawn out front, which is like classic Albuquerque in the 80s and 90s. But cottonwood trees get big, they crack the sidewalk. The cities had initiatives to phase out lawns. So by the time I moved in 5 years ago, it was just bare gravel. And when I mean bare gravel, nothing growing in it except for gravel and weed barrier under the gravel, because you don't want any.
I saw the picture. It was so uniform. I thought, oh, it must just be dead grass, but it's just like this very fine gravel over weed fabric, and that's it.
Yep. That's it.
Yeesh. Okay.
One little row of rose bushes right next to the front porch, and a couple of scattered accent plants, but essentially no wildlife habitat, no pollinators, nothing.
And you were saying that what prompted this is the city, for water conservation purposes, was providing incentives for people to transition out of grass.
That's right. So transitioning away from watering lawns towards low water landscapes, and a lot of people went straight to rock, gravel, because it's very low maintenance, zero water needed. And so just, I'd say the most efficient way to transform your landscape if you really want to do no gardening.
What a harsh landscape, though, man. Oof. Okay, so the next thing that happened to you is you wanted a garden, and you somehow connected with Albuquerque Backyard Refuge Program. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, why did you seek them out, and like, what advice did they give you?
I honestly don't remember why I seeked them out in the first place. I heard about it, thought it sounded interesting. I've always liked birds, and the person who runs it, we probably connected through birding circles. And I wanted to improve my garden with the idea of attracting things like hummingbirds and finches. So I connected with them, and our Backyard Refuge program here is a very local version of some other programs, Audubon, National Wildlife Foundation, Xerces. It's very tailored to the Albuquerque area in terms of having plant lists, recommendations for best practices for water conservation, improving soil health, uh, installing rain barrels, picking plants that are appropriate for our climate. So there's a lot of great information there, and also a great community in terms of finding like-minded people.
And so they kind of gave recommendations for native plants, I imagine. I remember we were talking earlier that you knew that you wanted plants, that you kind of moved to this property specifically because you wanted to have a garden going, and you planted rosemary. And tell us a little bit about like what they recommended. And also, you had your own experiments. You noticed, for example, just by chance, you would have sunflowers poke through the wheat fabric and establish.
That's right. So it started with trying to transform this gravel landscape into at least a little bit of color and texture, a little bit of green in there. So that first plant I bought was a rosemary bush. And I thought, well, rosemary is easy to grow. One of my neighbors has a huge rosemary bush. I see honeybees on it. You can cook with it. Okay, get a rosemary. And I started going to some nurseries around town, seeing what kind of plants they offered, looking at plant lists from the Backyard Refuge program and the New Mexico Native Plant Society, and playing around a little bit. Like, okay, what do I see when I'm hiking near my house or in other people's gardens? So bought a few things here and there, kind of at random, I would say. There wasn't a real purpose to it. It's like, oh, this plant has pretty flowers. I've seen this.
Go to a nursery and it's just, it gets out of hand.
It does. It does. You can spend a lot of money really fast at a nursery, and then it helps. I started to notice after a few years, of course, lots of weeds, and I'm talking like true weeds, tumbleweeds, the weed of the West, blowing through an old Western film, and other things like that are clearly undesirable. But also sunflowers, like I mentioned earlier, that just started popping up in the garden, apparently out of nowhere. I assume they came from finches eating the seeds somewhere else, pooping them out, and turns out they didn't care that it was this inhospitable gravel landscape. So I was able to build on that for both sides. So at this point, I have lots of plants that are pure volunteers. The seeds just showed up on their own, and I encourage them, but they do their own thing. And I also have plants that I bought. Some have done really well, some have died, but that's gardening. That's life.
Well, I want to transition now, because I think what's really fascinating and why I was so interested in doing a podcast with you is that you, this kind of circumstance of life of having a property and growing, wanting a garden, and then connecting with the Backyard Refuge program, sort of rekindled an interest that you had since childhood, which was natural history, starting as a birder. But then noticing you had all this life on the property. Tell us a little bit about how that took place, or where you started interest in natural history and how it sort of got rekindled by taking this gravel landscape and transitioning it.
That interest in birds really goes back to some of my first memories. That was something that my parents introduced me to. We had bird feeders. I read books on birds. I took binoculars on trips, and birding it's a great hobby. It's a great way to introduce people in general to nature, but it's also very focused. So when I'm out birding, I've got binoculars, I'm looking through them, and there really wasn't time, or it didn't cross my mind to look at the flowers, look at the bees, just looking at birds. And moved here to Albuquerque, bought this house, started working on the garden, and started a bird list, a yard list, because that's just something that seemed normal. Yeah.
So, of course.
See a bird, write it down. and connected with the Backyard Refuge program with the director, Laurel Ladwig, who's friends with Olivia Messenger Carroll up in Santa Fe. And she's, of course, the New Mexico bee expert. And Laurel said, Elliott, you have to buy this book, the Bees in Your Backyard book. So I got the book. This was my birthday in 2020 or 2021. So just a few years ago, I got the book. This was really the first time I knew anything about native bees. And between that and the gardening, I started to go out and actually pay attention to all this other life in the garden that wasn't just birds. And from there, as a lister, as a bird watcher who keeps lists of things, I thought, well, I'll start a list of bees now. So just on my phone was writing down different bees as I would see them, honeybees, bumblebees, and started to recognize more bees because of the book and stopping to take time to look at flowers. So, my first sweat bees, and from there just kept going.
Well, I imagine I can see the continuity, in many ways, keeping lists from birds, and then you run into bees. But also, one thing that you were mentioning earlier is the bees in your backyard, and also the common bees of the Western United States. Both those books are kind of like a bird book. Like, it's kind of the transition where you have a color picture, some natural history notes, some distribution maps. In some ways, it kind of like, you must have felt a familiarity. This is, even though they have 4 wings and 6 legs, there's something common in this format of doing natural history.
There is. And this also all coincided with COVID, with lockdowns. Mm-hmm. So I was getting to spend more time at home. I was getting to spend time reading the Bees in Your Backyard book, and then going out into the gardens and being able to look at the bees. And that was my social distancing. And it is great. It's great to have books where you can have that level of confidence in terms of seeing it and like, okay, I think this is what I saw. It's a perdita, or it's a learning how to pronounce them was a whole different story.
But of course.
But there's still I'd say an intimidation factor when you're coming to any kind of entomology as an outsider, as an amateur, because there's a lot of complicated terminology, Latin names. It's nice to have bees that you can refer to with common names like carpenter bees and bumblebees, not just for myself, but for talking to other people, because walking around saying how I've seen a Xylocopa californica, it's going to get blank stares. And I think bees they're getting better with that. Like with these books, a lot of the rest of the entomology, which I know we'll talk more about, the other insects I've seen here, is still pretty intimidating in terms of, okay, how do I classify this? How do I identify it? What do I need to see to identify it? I don't really like killing insects. I know that that's part of taxonomy, but I try and do as much as I can with live photos and finding safe ways to interact with them.
Well, so that brings us, I guess, to the next tool that you encountered, or it sounds like you also encountered it sort of simultaneously with being handed the Bees in Your Backyard. You discovered iNaturalist as a way to kind of cut through that, the machine learning tools and just the community of experts out there allows somebody to really rapidly move through taxa of organisms. Tell us a little bit about how you discovered iNaturalist and how you end up using it.
I discovered iNaturalist with the City Nature Challenge, which is an annual event that has a lot of publicity, especially in the Albuquerque area. There's lots of people associated with the University of New Mexico Expo and other organizations that try to get together events for people to go out, friendly competitions to see the most species and upload the most observations. So that was my intro to iNaturalist. And it really is, it's incredible. You take a picture of something, and assuming it's a good in focus picture, because sometimes you just can't get a clear picture of a bee. They fly away. But you get a nice picture of a bee, that algorithm on there has been trained on so many thousands or millions of photos that most of the time it actually gets you pretty close. And as someone coming from birding again, a lot of my bee watching is the same kind of pattern recognition that a birder would do with a field guide. So I'm looking at how they sit on a flower, how they move, what sound they make. I'm not paying attention to whether the hair bands are basal or apical, or how many veins are, how many submarginal cells are in the wing venation, or other characteristics that a taxonomist would use, especially when you have specimens under a microscope. So having iNaturalist having this.
So the iNaturalist has this algorithm that it's kind of keying into who knows what. Like it could be some weird, but you as a naturalist as well, just you're not having specimens where you are focusing in on these minor details that allow you to differentiate species. You're looking at behaviors. You're looking at the full realm of how they do things that kind of like put them in buckets.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I kind of glossed over the iNaturalist part. It's a machine learning algorithm where they fed in a bunch of photos with a bunch of labels, and then through whatever black box process, the computer learns how to sort photos in different categories, and will give you a recommendation. You put a photo in the app or the website, and it will say, I think this is in the genus Megachile. I think it's a leafcutter bee. And then you can go from there. And I will also say for iNaturalist, there are some really amazing folks on there. Dr. John Asher, did you have him on your podcast?
We have had him on a podcast, but it's hilarious when anybody comes on the show and they talk about iNaturalist. It's like, John Asher, because like John has he has cloned himself into many Johns.
It's unbelievable.
Somehow
he has over 1 million identification on iNaturalist.
I don't know how.
So he is like the person on there. There are other great people too, but he number wise, he's by far at the top, and he can just look at these photos and sort them. And
do you ever use iNaturalist in terms? Sorry to interrupt, but I just wondered. I always have my bubble in the corner of iNaturalist with all the messages, which I don't necessarily always read. But I know lots of people who do correspond through the app with the experts to get tips. Do you use that at all as a feature?
Yeah. So iNaturalist has essentially 3 different platforms that all function differently. They all have different capabilities. So if you use it on the iPhone app, you're quite limited in terms of what you can do with your photos. The Android app has a few more options than the website has the most options. So I do spend a lot of time on the website version. You can go in with your photos and you can compare them to other species seen nearby. You can leave comments and have these conversations back and forth with experts. You can also send direct messages to someone if you have more questions or other. I just got a message today from someone who's going to come to New Mexico next week, and they're trying to find what they think would be undescribed species of jumping spider. That I have a photo from the Santa Fe. Yeah. So that kind of thing happens more than I ever thought going into it.
Well, that's fantastic. And so this has allowed you to move into other groups. So there's bees, but that's you also mentioned nocturnal moths has become something that you're interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. So start out with bees and start out with a very basic point and shoot camera, and then dust it off an old DSLR Nikon DSLR camera that I used to take bird pictures with in high school. And I, for some reason, had a macro lens lying around. So I started trying to get better and better bee pictures. And then while I'm outside, there's not just bees. You know, wherever you have insects, wherever you have flowers, there's always bees, and then there's always everything else. And so I was focused on bees a lot at the beginning, but from just as time went on, I started to pay attention to other things, whether it was beetles on the flowers or spiders crawling around on the ground. And after a while, realized that if I really want to take the biodiversity part to the next level, I need to also look at nocturnal insects. So that used to be last year, that was just turning the porch lights on, going out and looking at what was sitting there on the stucco wall around the porch light. And then this year I got a UV lamp, a black light. And so now I set that up on most nights in the driveway with a white sheet, and then I take pictures of whatever comes into that.
Huh. And how difficult has that been? I imagine when it comes to bees and spiders, there's probably a lot of material on iNaturalist. Probably when it comes to non-butterfly Lepidoptera, it's probably a little bit slimmer.
Moths are a challenge, I'd say. It's true. There are big, showy, beautiful, easy to identify moths. I think a lot of people might have heard of a Luna moth or a Sphinx moth, and you might even be able to picture it in your mind. Mm-hmm. But here in New Mexico, we have one of those problems that's not a problem. We have too many species.
And they all look very similar, or is that a problem as well?
It can be. So yeah. If you think about bees, we have over 1,000 species of bees in New Mexico, and who knows how many lazy blossom, but how are you going to tell your lazy blossom apart from photos? You really can't. Mm-hmm. So like when I'm keeping track of them on my yard list, I have comments next to it, what time of year they're active, what flowers I saw them on, maybe if I've gotten a clear enough picture, what color the wings are, or things that might differentiate species. So, more species.
Where do these comments live? How do you do this? Tell us the workflow.
I've got a big Excel sheet at this point. So it started off with that phone list, and then to keep track of everything, not just the bees, but all the insects and plants, I started keeping track of it in Excel.
Do you use I imagine in iNaturalist, everything has got a unique URL, but also has a unique identifying number. Is that how you sort of anchor your observations? You have in your Excel sheet
Yeah. If it's identifiable to species, then I've just got it listed there as a species. If it's something that's kind of hanging out there,
yeah,
like a Dialectus bee, then I can link it to an iNaturalist observation and say, this is the green tinted spring Dialectus that seems to like brassica flowers.
Mouthful.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be a lot easier to put a name on it, but then I'd have to catch them, and they're pretty hard to catch too.
So that does give you a sense, like you can sort of say, I know I've got, so many Dialectus, but of the ones in the spring, I can discern some difference between two. And so I think there's at least 2 or 3 species there, or 4 or 5 or whatever, but you can kind of guesstimate and break up these groups that are otherwise you can't resolve the species.
Yes.
That's brilliant. That's really smart.
Yeah, so I've done that. I'd say dialectus is probably the biggest question mark on my B list. Right now, I have
Everyone's B list. That's just
yes, yes, yeah. I mean, right now it's I have it at 90 species of bees on my list for
90
my yard.
species on your yard?
That's
That's
right.
incredible. Okay,
Yeah,
you could.
I
Yeah,
just
go
went
ahead.
through it before we started talking. So it's about 90 species, again, depending on the number of dialectus, in 37 genera. So
That is really amazing. That is remarkable. I wonder, with all these backyard certification programs, clearly not everybody. This is not everybody's thing, although I think it should be. But I really wonder, like, at a yard, at a suburban yard like level, that seems remarkably high. But you're also in New Mexico.
yes, I do. I have the benefits of being in New Mexico and having lots of ground nesting habitat. Um, some of these are bees that I've only seen once or twice, and some of them are very common, like Halictus tripartitus and Bombus pennsylvanicus, which there's probably a nest somewhere in my backyard, given the how much I see them, and it's really cool because
Hmm.
they're all sizes, shapes. We've got the big xylocopas here, the big black carpenter bees, and earlier this year I found one chewing a nest in a neighbor's yard about half a block one way and then about a block down the hill. And that neighbor has a tree yucca in their yard. And the carpenter bee was there chewing a nest into the flower stalk of the tree yucca.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
So that was amazing. I was cleaning up my garden this spring and I was taking old sunflower stems and just kind of snapping them and scattering them as mulch. And one of them split open and there was a serotina in it that
Oh, really?
the the body was fully developed, but for whatever reason it didn't emerge. But I could see the nest cells on either side of it
Yeah.
that appeared to have emerged. So this for some reason this one bee didn't, but this beautiful large bluish metallic serotina that had nested in old sunflower stem.
Well, it does make me think, coming around to it, we started with this property that you got, and now you've not only experimented with plants and let that get out of hand, but also have been making observations. If you were to go back 2, 3 years ago and say what plants, really have been kind of key, like you kind of make observations on them, ease of growth, all of those things. Which plants now are on your plant list for like must have in people with a gravel front yard?
If I could go back even further, if I could go back to when I first moved in, the initial thing I would have done was to tear out all of that weed fabric because at this point, the areas between where I've planted are so colonized with grasses and volunteer wildflowers and stuff that to get out the wheat fabric, which improves the soil and provides more access for bees to dig their nests and stuff, but it also then disturbs lots of plant roots. And so that'd be my first note to someone with a gravel yard to just get rid of the plastic, the fabric, whatever's in there, get rid of it. You can still have rock, you can still have structure, but also think about those habitat elements in terms of having, and they can be really small patches. I have those lazy glossum and halictus. I see them basically dive in between gravel. So their nests are somewhere down there, and they somehow they find it too, which is incredible. I didn't think of bees as being smart as having those abilities, but somehow they're navigating in this sea of gravel
Yeah.
back to one spot where that nest is dug.
But it's important to point out that things like nesting area doesn't have to be like half the property. That you need to leave something bare, and the weed fabric, of course, is kind of taking a big chunk of that area away.
Yes. Yeah. And with all of my gardening recommendations, I'd say you can do any little bit of it, or you can do as much as you want. It's you can landscape 100% with native plants, or 50%, or 10%. Every little bit makes a difference. But to answer your question about which plants I recommend or which have done well, first I have to start with sunflowers. I mean, sunflowers are just great. They're beautiful. They bloom all summer long. Sometimes here from late May all the way to September, October, if we get enough moisture and depending on when that the first freeze is in the fall. So sunflowers are great. They support so many different kinds of bees. A couple of years ago, I started a list of not just the bees, but everything I was seeing on sunflowers, because there's your solitary hunting wasps and your social hunting wasps and your robber flies that are hunting the other flying insects, and moths and beetles, so much stuff. So sunflowers just support a whole community. And beyond that, for New Mexico, cactus is really good, especially prickly pear cactus, because we have the diadasia, the chimney bees, and the Lithogopsis, the wood borer bees, that are both love cactus, but cactus again also supports other pollinators. You'll see hummingbirds. And I said I started this to support things like hummingbirds, right? Well, I've learned along the way, a bulk of a hummingbird's diet is insects. They need a lot of protein from insects, and usually small little insects, aphids and gnats and things that they can catch. But all these native plants and pesticide-free plants, safe plants, safe food for the birds, also benefits the pollinators, also benefits all this other wildlife. So beyond the sunflowers, the cactus, glow mallow is a really good plant here in the Southwest. I don't know, do you have glow mallow in Oregon?
We do, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a really great plant across the West. Just before we started talking, it's been actually kind of cloudy and drizzly here. So in between breaks in the rain, the Bombus pennsylvanicus workers are out in the glow mallow patch in my front yard, just collecting as much as they can and hiding from the rain. But they're a lot braver than the other bees.
Is there a kind of flush? You have rain that comes in. I know it's been a hot and smoky year for you guys, but is it? You have a little bit of a fall flora that pops up at this time of year?
Yeah, flora in general here is very seasonal. So, like you said, it's been hot, dry. I think in between May and August, like end of May and beginning of August, we had no or almost no appreciable rain. And going into August, we were somewhere around 3 inches of rain for the year. So we got the spring flush of flowers, which a lot of that was due to me watering stuff, because we also didn't have a particularly wet winter. So those spring flowers are things like penstemon. I didn't mention penstemon before. Penstemon are great. And another one, they're so adaptable. So you've got penstemon that love heat and desert, and then you've got penstemon that grow, up on Mount Rainier and Mount Hood. And the penstemon is a great spring flower for bees. Phacelia, the scorpion weeds, and other kind of weedy things like mustards, or tansy mustards, and then you get into some rose flower plants in the rose family. So like service berries and fruit trees. And then it definitely cooled off here in terms of flower and insect activity for a bit of the summer. We had a big rain in early August. A lot of things came back. Some of those summer Asteraceae and a few of the other little, again, kind of weedy things like the euphorbias, those little sand mat ground spreaders.
Right. Yeah.
And they have, they've got little dialectus bees, little Purda. The Purda minima is famous for visiting those euphorbia flowers.
I remember reading that in Bees in Your Backyard.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it'd be really cool to have that one in my yard, but I think we're a little out of the range. And
so what? Yeah. So keep going. Keep going. We'll have another question for you though.
Well, hopefully now, if we get enough rain here, we will have this flush of fall flowers. So rabbit brush, again, great plant all across the Western U.S. If you look at I'm sure you're familiar with it. There's that website, Gerard Fowler.
Oh, no, I'm not familiar with that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Fowler and Sam Drogi, they put together this specialist bees website.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
But if you look at Asteraceae and you look at Chamisa, rabbit brush, Chrysothemis, and Heracamaria, the list is like hundreds long in terms of the number of specialist bees that visit it. So that's one that really just brings in tons of bees, migrating butterflies, moths, all kinds of things. And that'll be in probably next month.
It's from members of the Oregon Bee Atlas, and I imagine the same with Washington. As soon as you go east of the Cascade, it by and large the most number of samples have come off any of the rabbit brush species, for sure. Yeah. But for us, it just started. It's just started blooming. Well, it depends which species, but we're kind of into peak bloom here. Is it the same in New Mexico?
It's one of those plants that has a clear altitudinal and latitudinal timing to it. So a couple weeks ago, I was up in Colorado, and the rabbit brush there in Colorado and northern New Mexico was just starting to flower. But here in my yard, it's just got flower buds on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's one of those plants that seems to probably something to do with day length, and it's timed very well for those migrating pollinators. So up in your area, it's blooming heavily right now, and then as they travel further down, the blooms seem to travel south as the fall goes on.
Oh, fascinating. Well, tell us a little bit about what your yard looks like now. Like I saw a picture of it, how it started. You've got shrubs, you've got a number of ephemerals that come up in the spring, some perennials, and describe your garden now, your front yard.
My front yard now is a verifiable mess. It is not what you would not see it in any blogs, in any landscape books. Like, this is not what people go for. But I've got an overgrown desert willow in one corner, which is probably something that the Oregon listeners won't be familiar with. It's not a true willow.
Oh.
It's in the catalpa family.
Oh,
and
really?
It has, kind of
strange
purple and white flowers that hang down, and they're a little bit tubular.
Like the catalpa. We do have catalpas as an ornamental tree here.
Yeah. Okay,
but so they're huge.
Yeah, so it's a smaller version of a catalpa, but the leaves are narrow, like a narrow leaf willow.
Oh, I'll be darned.
So got a big overgrown one of those. That one in the summertime just buzzes with pollinator activity. The sphinx moths, the bumblebees, leafcutter bees. Down further south where it's native, there is a specialist leafcutter bee, Megachile chelopsidus, that visits the desert willow.
Okay.
And yeah, next to that, I've got a whole bunch of the sunflowers right now and lower growing stuff like some wild buckwheat, eriogonum, and zinnias. Not the showy zinnias, but the zinnia grandiflora, the prairie zinnias, which have little four-petal yellow flowers kind of close to the ground. And the rest of it, all that gravel has been very well colonized by native bunch grasses, side oats grama, blue grama, and purple threon. And that stuff provides a lot of backbone. So that's places for animals of all kinds to shelter, but also, holds down the soil and traps leaf litter and traps snow in the wintertime that holds down moisture, shades the soil, all those things. And then in between all of that, I've got all kinds of mixes of penstemon and cactus and lycium, which is goji berry.
Oh, okay.
But our essentially our native goji berry. So Lycium torii, the Torii wolfberry or goji berry, that one is has these little delicate purple flowers, and the Anthophora love it. They just patrol it all day long, and then it produces these red berries that I can eat, and I see the phoebes eating them. So,
oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's an eclectic mix. There's agaves in there. There's other, annuals in there, and there are things like blue flax that bloom in the spring and then die out pretty much or died back, all the way up to the glow mallow, which comes back from the roots in the spring and blooms through the fall. So.
Well, and I think, just to round things out, your list. So
yes,
you have, of all of these plants, you had indicated to me you have about 100 native and about 100 non-native plants. So 200 species of plants. Tell us about all the rest of the critters. What's your totals? I know for someone who comes from a bird background, most of us are really love to know that the numbers. What does it look like on your property?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the plants before we came on, because I was thinking about it in the case of cactus, having 40 individuals of one species of cactus or one individual each of 40 species of cactus. One makes your list a lot longer. But they probably provide about the same benefit.
Yeah.
So I have about 200 species of plants. And when you say non-native, what I'm including in there are things like apple trees and raspberry bushes and bearded irises. So what it really represents is 48 plant families.
Okay.
So
that's really impressive.
Yeah, that's trying to benefit, not starting out not on purpose, but now trying to benefit all different kinds of wildlife, from specialist bees to moths and butterflies that rely on different.
I think in some ways, that's a way better way of categorizing things at the family level. Having family level diversity really is kind of like more significant than having a lot of diversity within a family.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I also want to mention real quick with the plants that food crops can be great pollinator plants, like squash. I know you've had the squash bee hunt up there in Oregon.
Yeah.
And so is it just the one species?
Yeah.
So far?
Yeah. There's I don't know in the West how many species. Well, in California, where our I don't know how many species they have in California.
I know down here we have both Pepinapis, which I know some people are now calling Eucera.
Eucera, yeah.
And Xenoglossa. So we have both the large squash bees and the smaller squash bees. So growing yeah, just growing squash and pumpkins could benefit the pollinators like that. And they're really fun to watch too. Super fast, but really fun to watch. And I'm getting distracted.
So yeah, so I think it's an important point to bring across. There's often non-native within the family analogs that oft native bees will visit, and a little unclear to me whether they we have a great project that's going on here at OSU looking at native plants and nativars and sort of differential floral visitation. But nevertheless, you have a plant that's in the same genus, but from the eastern US or somewhere else. Oftentimes, native bees will be in there.
Yeah. And you have, depending on your location, probably about 50% generalist bees, 50% specialist bees. So you could do a lot for those generalist bees in a garden setting with, I've attracted them with things like cover crops, planting buckwheat and vetch, and just having, the fruit trees that bloom. And I have a trumpet creeper vine that the bumblebees like, which has these large tubular red flowers. And
well,
all
so
kinds of stuff.
How many species of bees do you think you have?
Yes. So yes, to answer your list question. So the bee species is around 90, and all the other things.
Wow. Oh, we talked about this already. We got your bee species. That's
we
amazing.
We did get the bee species.
Yeah.
I'll repeat it just to brag. We've got about 90 bee species.
Right. What else do we got? What else do you have on your property?
So if you move up from bees, I have the order of bees and wasps and ants, Hymenoptera, that's about 264 total right now. So that's all the parasitic wasp and the ants and the sawflies. And moving up again from that to insects, have about, at latest count, 1,300 insect species on my property.
That is unbelievable, isn't it? That's crazy.
It doesn't feel real in some ways, because I don't know. It's like, where did they come from? How do they end up here? I know they fly here. I know that part, but
but still, like that. Yes. There's you've created quite a complicated landscape, but it's a hard number to wrap your head around, because it's 1,000 different niches, food webs. Like, it seems quite intricate and complicated for a property.
It is, and thinking about what niches they fill with the bees, it's been really interesting, because you have your regular foraging bees, then you have your cuckoo bees, of course, but you also have all kinds of other stuff that I've learned about that relies on that bee life cycle. So I have a parasitic wasp here called Grotea lokii, and it's one of 3 species in North America, and it's a Serotina parasitoid.
Oh.
So it's a very long, skinny, ichneumoniid wasp with a very long, skinny ovipositor, so it can find those stem nests of Serotina and lay its eggs in there.
Amazing. Huh.
And bee flies, the Bombylidae, however you pronounce it, a lot of them are some kind of nest parasite of an Anthophora or a Didasia or something like that. So it's interesting to think about how that fits together and how helping pollinators helps that whole ecosystem.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it is great. I guess you can make those connections together when you're watching them all. If you're laser focused on one group, you may miss all the kind of interactions that are happening in their orbit.
Yeah. Just last week, I saw a Mellifera, which is a super fuzzy robber fly that you wouldn't be blamed for confusing it with a bumblebee. Like it's that fuzzy and yellow and black. And I saw one perched on a stem, and I took a photo of it with my macro lens. I zoomed in. The bee it had caught was an anthodione. I could see just enough of the bee to see those kind of yellow horseshoes on the abdomen. And they're really cute bees. Like I've learned so much about bees from this, because once you get beyond honeybees and you start paying attention to all the other ones, and black and yellow and green, and one of my favorite, well, I don't want to spoil the segment later, in terms of favorite pollinators. So I'll leave that one.
Well, that sets us up real well. I'm sure everybody wants to hear it, so let's go right to it. We'll take a quick break, and let's come back, and we want to get into your whatever we do on this next section.
All right.
Okay, we are back. So I'm so curious to see your answers, because I imagine the resources that you have and the tools that you use, and then the pollinator species that is front of mind. It's going to be a complicated set of answers from you. So let's start with book recommendation. What would you recommend to people? I'm sure people are have their pencil and they're like, I just want to know, all the books.
So I already mentioned Olivia and Joe's book, Bees in Your Backyard. And that's a great book. I wanted to highlight also another book that's probably a little more niche, by a fellow. His name is Sean McCosham, and he's a biologist that works out of West Texas, and had a chance to talk with him a little bit last year and interview him for a blog post. And he has a book that's called Inviting Pollinators and Other Wildlife into Your Garden. So I like it because he has some very specific things, like these beautiful nest diagrams of an agapostemon and the tube underground, and also what flowers that are associated with some different bees. And then he has other suggestions in there, or a lot of it's kind of desert Southwest oriented. So like ways to build up a little rock pile so that your lizards can shelter during the day. And also he talks about those habitat elements like bare ground for native bees and stem nesting and stuff. So I think it's a nice book to have that range of information.
And so it is a kind of it kind of goes through. It has this combination of natural history and tip. It's sort of like it both a little kind of glimpse of the variety of nest architecture, and a kind of you should do this.
Yeah, a
little bit
of a how-to, a little bit of a informative guide for gardeners.
Is it a big book, or is it yeah?
It's 160 pages.
Oh, so that's a substantial treatment of the topic.
yeah. He had a more compact one to start, but then this one he really expanded it with a lot of that bee and plant information that's more specific, and a lot of it's based on his fieldwork in West Texas and New Mexico.
Oh, good. I am looking forward to getting that on my bookshelf. That is great.
Yeah.
Okay. The next section that we have is the go-to tool.
Well, for me, this was easy, and I consider this one tool, and be iNaturalist and my camera. So iNaturalist, I do want to say it's not just a tool; it's also a community of biologists and botanists and naturalists and people of all experience and skill level. But it is also an amazing tool because of that computer vision algorithm that analyzes your photos and gives you suggestions. And mapping tool to say what species live where, and even you can go through and you could say pull up all the pictures of a bumblebee, of a specific bumblebee in Oregon, and see what flowers it's on because they're live recordings of that animal in that place. So here's a bumblebee on a goldenrod, here's a bumblebee on an iris, and you can get all kinds of information from having this network of millions of users around the world and having this freeze frame of information beyond. Sometimes a pin specimen has a lot of information on it in terms of where it was caught and what habitat and maybe even what flowers. But sometimes it's just a pin specimen.
Yes.
And it misses a lot of that context.
Well, the thing I really like about, because I had this interesting conversation with somebody recently that, a lot of wildlife biology is, going through camera footage. Like, their trail cam, it's become trail camized. And what I really love about the way that you use iNaturalist is in a very active way. You're kind of probing the natural history in a very, in a kind of active way rather than just, I kind of worry sometimes with the image recognition technology that, that curiosity will just fall out. It'll just be this, like, the world will be it'll be like downtown London with cameras capturing all the people and the curiosity of people like yourself. I love the way that you've merged these together.
And curiosity really drives iNaturalist because sometimes it's just curiosity for what is this flower? And sometimes it's that more advanced curiosity of what can I document in this place? The idea of a bioblitz, trying to see as many organisms in a place in a small amount of time.
I have to say I was heartened when I heard that, because I know lots of organizations plan bioblitzes with, no real kind of idea of like how it'll pan out. But I love that, it was through a bioblitz that you discovered iNaturalist, and look what it's done. So that one event kind of like spiraled off into this very wonderful way.
It's true. And you never know what you're going to see. I mean, one of the beauties of it is you don't have to know what your picture is, but someone probably knows.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been cases of people finding undescribed species that they didn't know were undescribed, but they uploaded a picture and then a scientist followed up on it and was able to name a new species just off of initially what was a photo on iNaturalist.
I know when we had the crazy, murder hornet,
yes,
panic of, the last couple of years, people have been documenting large wasps that were largely unnoticed before on iNaturalist. And I thought, oh, there's a kind of like silver lining to all this. It's like people have taken an interest in wasps again, the difference between them. But I guess the other thing that I think is really key to all of this is, that there is this community, and you did share this anecdote, this story that, you had documented a spider, and an expert saw it and contacted you and is going to, a person studying a creature has a person on the ground who might help them, direct them to where that some of the natural history elements and where it's located.
It's not something that I would have expected before, because going back to birds, it's very rare for a new bird to be described these days. And scientists have been really thorough about finding birds all over the world. And most new bird species these days are just genetic splits, essentially. Like just saying, here's two populations of a bird, and we've done the barcoding and we think it's different enough to call it two species, which is not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it's not really
but when you get into insects, you're suddenly, in that pile of dialectus, there's going to be some new species,
Yes,
not
that's
described to science. Yeah,
exactly. There could be something that literally no one has ever photographed before, no one has ever seen before. And in that case, saw a jumping spider near Santa Fe earlier this year, uploaded some photos of it, and just received a message earlier today of a scientist who said, I'm going to be in the area looking to collect some of these because I think there's an undescribed species. And how, where was your sighting? How can I access that spot to maybe
that's
find them
amazing.
again?
That is so cool. I love that. Well, it's a great tool. I glad you recommended it. And now the big reveal. Do you have a favorite pollinator species?
I do. So
Oh,
yeah, I know I have so many to choose from, but I will say, first of all, it's hard to pick a favorite. I love them all almost equally, but there's this specific bee, and this is the Arizona nomia bee, which is
oh,
Dianomia nevadensis arizonensis. So I think, well, actually, you had a podcast, right, on the nomias that are used for alfalfa pollination, right?
Melandra, yeah. And from what I know, I think it might be the only species of the genus in Oregon. I think there might be
Yeah.
another one, but I think it's only one.
So on the other side, the sister genus to nomia is Dianomia, which is sometimes they're called epinomia, but it's I think mostly southwestern. Then there's also some eastern species
Uh-huh.
like Heteropoda and Triangulifera. And in this case, this arizonensis species, the Arizona nomia, it's just a beautiful, beautiful bee because the males have two or three tergites that are kind of an orangey color, a burnt orange color, and then the rest are
Ooh.
black with these crisp white hair bands in between and these slightly curved long antenna and smoky wings. And then the females have this mostly like orange body, and it's kind of like a brown orange color. And they visit these low growing asteraceae, these low growing golden weed and snakeweed bushes in my yard and also in the foothills around here. And they're just super fun to watch. They're like a late summer fall bee, and I think it's really interesting because they're this example of the diversity of native bees in terms of color and shape and size, and also they're just fun to see. So
Are they common? Is someone in New Mexico able to are they kind of like super hard to find?
I would say this time of year, if you go find a patch in central or southern New Mexico, you go find a patch of yellow flowers, you'll probably see them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not super common.
Okay.
And it is, I would say, one of the things about iNaturalist that you can be a little bit competitive about it. At least I can be a little bit competitive about it. You could say, so I love seeing my name at the top of a list. Like Elliott has seen the most of this species. And it's funny for things like a bunch of different bee species in New Mexico. If you go zoom in on the iNaturalist map, it'll just be a cluster of points around my garden.
That's great.
So they're out there. People can go find them. These Novia bees, they're a little smaller than a honeybee, but they're not so small that you gotta, really like get up close or use a macro lens.
Well, it's been a real delight talking with you today. I'm sure many people are inspired to, if they had any hesitation or reticence about documenting insect biodiversity in their yard, I hope they've kind of walked away with this, with seeing not only is it possible, but it really is a world of wonder just kind of waiting for you.
There absolutely is. Day or night, whether you care about beetles or bees or moths or spiders, and there's something for everyone. And it's great to connect or kind of reconnect with nature. I think studying bees and being outside is really important to appreciate it. And also from the conservation perspective, we hear about pollinators in decline, insects in decline. This is a way we can help. I don't know that there would have been, I'm sure there would have been more here before my house was built, but I'm trying to bring it back. I'm trying to invite these animals back and give them a space where they can thrive.
Well, thank you so much for telling us about it. Thank you so much, Gordon.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links from each episode are available at the website pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's a form at the website where you can pop in and say hello and give me feedback. If you want to support the show, remember to leave a rating on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcast mothership you use. And finally, if you have the means and you want to help support my lab's effort to document bee biodiversity in Oregon, visit OregonBeeAtlas.org and follow down to the donate button, where you can make a tax-deductible donation to the Jerry and Judith Paul Native Pollinator Endowment. Every little bit helps. See you next episode.